Thank you everyone for joining us today. Really happy to have you here. So we've got a lot to cover. We've got two presentations and then a panel discussion at the end, and I'm eager to get into that. But before we jump into the first presentation, I just want to set up a little bit of a framing for this webinar. So there's two themes that are sort of running through this webinar. The first is around climate resilient sanitation technology. I won't belabor the point that climate change is happening, and there's already a lot of evidence that shows that climate hazards can severely disrupt sanitation services. And we know that climate resilient sanitation is more than just technology and infrastructure. We have decades of experience from sustainable sanitation service delivery that points to the importance of strengthening systems, the importance of paying attention to socio-political and environmental dimensions. And those things are equally important for climate resilience. So we're not just going to simply build our way out of the problem. That said, technologies and infrastructure are really important. They're a critical piece of the puzzle, and they're worth discussing in more in depth. So to that end, we have two presentations that are going to share some of the latest thinking and research around climate resilient sanitation technologies. So one of those will come from Dr. Tatchai from the Asian Institute of Technology, and the other presentation will come from myself on work that I've developed with my colleagues at the University of Technology, Sydney. The second theme running through this webinar is around non-sewered sanitation standards. And those are really important because we know that globally, the quantity of toilets being built and the amount of sanitation coverage is increasing, but the quality of those systems isn't really keeping up. And non-sewered sanitation standards are really important for addressing that quality issue in terms of providing providing for processes for quality assurance. They can enable certification, which can help governments in cataloging where systems are meeting appropriate standards. And they can also facilitate innovations and global adaptation on how we can design better sanitation technologies and provide an impetus for business developers to come up with products that meet these certifications and standards. So to that end, we have two experts in non-sewered sanitation standards with Dr. Priyan and Maggie, who will also be talking throughout this webinar. So, and then at the end, we're going to have a panel discussion where we're going to touch on both of those themes, climate resilient sanitation technologies and non-sewered sanitation standards. And we're hoping to bring those together and look at the nexus of those things as well. So both of these themes are fairly emergent in new areas. So the nexus of them is even more new. So we hope that this topic is going to be really intriguing for you. And we think it's going to be a really critically important space going forward. So we hope that what we say here has a lot of resonance for the work that you guys are engaging with. So I'll hand over to Dr. Tatchai now, and he's going to do our first presentation related to climate resilient sanitation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, for your introductions. Then I will continue to have the first presentation of our webinars that is related in terms of the Climate-Smart WASH Technology Catalogs. Actually, in this work, we got the support from the UNICEF, and then I saw in so many participants come from the UNICEF here as well. And then thank you very much in advance, and then that we can share and then exchange the knowledge with among the participants in these webinars. For these projects, we work together with the project leader from the Professor Thamlak Kutatep, but today he has the urgent missions. He could not join for the presentation and also the discussions, and then I will take care in his part, and then for the presentation, and then share the information to all of you. In the informations for the Climate-Smart WASH Catalog that we work in these kind of the areas, the background of the project that start from as we know, we have the several issues or the problems nowadays, and then that's why in the several innovative WASH technologies has been developed in the different contexts that to make sure we have the very sustainable solutions in the futures. And then the Climate-Smart WASH catalogs can have a kind of the support for the WASH actors to have a best performance available, and then it can be deliver the best possible outcomes for the children, for the peoples. And in the meantime, it can help to advise that can ensure that decision makers or the actions that can work in the proper directions. And in the work for the Climate-Smart WASH Catalog, and then this is we conduct like kind of the existing surveys to collect the data, the informations. This is we also provide the information in the questionnaires, collect from the literatures, and also we have the kind of the meeting with the expert to have the informations, which can be a kind of the form in the online catalogs and also the offline catalog that we can deliver at the end from this kind of the projects. In the term that maybe we have to realize during the developments of the kind of the catalogs or the climate-smart technologies, we have to understand about the next normal in the sanitations. We heard the terms about the next normals during the pandemics, but right now in this term, we have to take in account for the sanitation as well, because of the key things in the kind of the development as the report from the UNICEF. We have to ensure for the WASH facility and the service. It could be the sustainable, safe, and also it could be the resilient to the climate-related risks in the futures. And not only that one, in the second part that also highlighted by the UNICEF, it should be guarantee the resilience of the WASH system, should contribute into the build of the community resilience and also the adapts into the impact of the climate change. And also the last one, also in the next normal that we have to consider that relate in terms of the carbon neutral WASH sectors, relate in terms of the GHG emissions, and then how to make like a carbon balance or the zero emissions from the system. That could be one part of the area that in the future we should have to have the key concern or consideration in this point. And for the terminologies or the definitions of the Climate-Smart WASH technology, it can be defined as the technological approach in the mitigations and also adaptations in the same times. It means we have to consider for reduce or to evaluate of the carbon emissions from the system, for the sanitation facilities, and also in the same time, it could be adapt to the climate change, which together we have to consider in terms of the managing to reduce the pollutions that release into the environment. It means that in this kind of the developments, we have to address like an interlink to the challenge between the environmental pollutions together with the climate change. And not only that one, when we talk about the smart or the innovations, that is important that we have to take into the account to develop in the futures. When we talk about the Climate-Smart WASH technology, it's not like a conventional solutions, but we have to think like some innovative WASH technologies, and also maybe it can be the reporting technologies solutions, and also the self-monitoring that also include in the area of the Climate-Smart WASH Technology Catalog reviews. For the details of the catalogs that how we work or the approach that we did, we also design to have a kind of the categories to define in the scope of the reviews. The first one, this is like options to reduce the consequence of the climate change that we could consider in terms of the emissions, because in this part we have to evaluate from each technologies that we have the information in terms of the GHG emissions. In this one, we divide into a main part in the emissions, like in the scope 1 and the scope 2. Scope 1 is like a direct emissions from the process, from the treatment process. And then this is also, we have some kind of the calculation for the emissions. But for indirect emissions, we also classify as the energy source, like a renewable energy use or the fossil fuel energies, or maybe in some categories can be no energy use. That also in the part of the emission that we take into the considerations. And also the adaptation part that also relate in terms of the climate risks or the extreme events that might be happens. We scope down from the definition of the IPCC from the 16 events, maybe into the measures concern right now that we categorize in terms of the tropical storm, drought, extreme cold, flooding, the sea level rise, and also heat extremes. That also is a part of the climate risks that we take into the considerations for the reviews of the adaptations. For the system in the WASH informations, we categorize in terms of the area, like the waters, like this is for the water supply, also the sanitation terms. In this one, we scope in the definition, start from the primary treatments, like the on-site sanitations, up into the fecal solid treatment process. And for the hygiene, this is a related technology in terms of hand washings or any like a cleansing agents or the activity also related in terms of the hygiene part of our reviews. And also in the category of our catalogs, we also go into the detail to categorize in terms of the geographical locations and also the phase of the emerging sanitations. That also we also include that as a part for the criteria of the review and the categories. Let's say, for example, when we categorize in the area of the reviews, and then it can help for the user to choose which one they may interest to use the information, which one is the target area, or maybe which one it can be a kind of the solution for the specific context. In this one, just to show some of the examples that we try to come up with the preliminary estimations of the carbon emissions from each technologies. We try to bring a kind of the empirical equations together with the emission factors that come from maybe the review from IPCC, the literature data, and also our own survey to develop a kind of the emission factor that can be used as the value for the comparisons. And then the first one is like a calculations to maybe the carbon emission from the treatment process. And then also we can consider for the carbon emission from the energy use. And the third one can be the calculate from the disposal part or the effluent discharge that contain maybe some the pollutant that can cause another the impact from the GHG emissions, and also the solid accumulation of fecal solid that generate from the process. That also we have a kind of the process to evaluate and calculation in this step. Like for example, when we have some kind of the input data from the review, from the questionnaires to collect the data, we can use this kind of the input into the estimations. And then based on this one, it can be come up with the tentative value for the maybe the kilogram of carbon equivalents per year that emit from the unit or from the process. Then we can compare from the other technology as well, what happened, and then what are the level that they can manage in the future for this kind of the mitigation measures. And then this is a kind of the tables that also we summarize after we review, we complete the process. We come up with the summarize of the technologies, and then we categorize in terms of the sectors, and also in some technologies can be the mitigation in the scope 1. It means it can also cause the impact from the emissions from the treatment process, and also maybe some case it can be the energies that they use in the unit. We also remark in as the mitigations in the scope 1 and scope 2, and also the adaptations from some technologies, and also the criteria for cost costing, like an innovative technology that we have the criteria to evaluate on that one. This is the examples of some extract information that we come from the catalogs. We have the total GHG emission that can provide. For example, in some technology for the hygienes, like a food operated hand washing stations. This one there is no the energy use, and then that's why the emission from the GHG cannot be evaluated. And also in this catalog, we also provide with a kind of the cost estimation per unit, and also the operation cost as well, that can help for the decision makers or the planners or the actors to choose suitable in terms of the finance aspect. And not only that one, in our catalogs, we also provide a kind of the climate resilience and the adaptations. We define the term of these two. It's like if we talk about the climate resilience, it means like the technologies that can imply ability of the system into the absorb of the stock adapt to the change conditions and also the recovery quickly from the disturbance. Like for example, in the solar septic tank that we analyzed, we found that in this one we use the high temperatures to operate of the biological process in the septic tank for the treatments of the pollutants. And then if we apply in the climate events like a cold climate situations, it can be maintained the biological process because the temperature is not much effect in terms of the maintaining within the range of the temperatures. And also the adaptations in the hours definitions, it can be a kind of the emphasize on the adjusting or adapting the sanitation system to the currents or to the impact of the climate change. It can be the several criteria or the categories. I think in these two parts, the next presenter, Dr. Jeremy, can show you in the detail for the how to bring into the in-depth analysis of the ClimateFIRST. And also the cyclone, that also we bring some innovative technology to have in these kind of the catalogs. You can see here in the how the catalog look like, and then it can go into the link of each technologies, and then we can summary have the like a technology and descriptions, also the direct emissions from the estimation of the equations and also indirect emissions, and then it can come up with the total GHG emissions. And also it can be a kind of the key criteria from the climate resilience or climate risks, and then adaptabilities. And then this is the part to provide kind of the guidance or the information for the users. This is some introductions or the sharing information from our teams. And then this is we also provide the online versions. And then you can visit the GWSC at the AIT. And then in the knowledge, and you can see some catalog information, and you can download and you can get some information from that as I refer to for these presentations. I think that's all from our side, and thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Tachai. Jump right into my presentation now. I'm hoping to leave plenty of time for answering questions and going into the panel discussion afterwards. But Tachai, I think there was a couple questions for you in the chat box, so you could even jump into the chat box now and maybe respond to some of those. So now I'm going to present a framework that my colleagues and I developed called ClimateFIRST, which stands for the Climate Framework to Improve Resilience of Sanitation Technologies. And I'm going to give an overview of this framework, but I'm going to really focus on one component of the framework, which I think is relevant for our discussions around non-sewered sanitation standards. So ClimateFIRST, it's an Excel-based framework that facilitates a process in which the user can assess climate-related hazards, consider the extent to which they affect a sanitation technology they're assessing, and think about how the risks of these hazards could be reduced through better technology design. And the reason for this is it provides a systematic process in which one can think about various risks that climate hazards present and how the technology could be improved. And it's also a way of comparing different technologies and looking at their relative merits. So anyone that's involved in the development of a technology might be interested in this. This could include technology developers or regulators or implementers or even planners. And when I say it's for sanitation technologies, I primarily mean on-site or decentralized containment and treatment technologies. So not referring to things like vacuum trucks or big centralized sewer wastewater treatment facilities. So it has 5 steps, which I'll go over one by one. But as I said, I'm going to focus on step number 4 about design features. So this first step is that the framework, once you get into it, facilitates you to do some scoping. So you decide what your sanitation technology is that you're going to assess, and then you decide what's in and out of the assessment. So for example, in these photos on the right, I think this is a communal ABR in a village in Indonesia. And you might say, well, we want to include the ABR chambers in our assessment, and we want to include this main sewer line and these brackets holding the main sewer line. But we're not going to consider the household connections, and we're not going to assess the superstructure because maybe those things are out of our hands as developers. Maybe the community decides what kind of superstructure it's going to be. So we don't have information on that. The next step after doing the scoping is to decide what hazardous events and trends are relevant for your area. And just like Tachai and his colleagues did in theirs, we went into the IPCC and looked at what they defined as climatic impact drivers, and we pulled out these 8. So the user of the framework would decide which of these events or trends do you want to focus on. So maybe you're only worried about 1 or 2 of these in a given context, or maybe if you're working in Nepal or Laos, which are landlocked countries, you're not going to be worried about high sea levels, so you can deselect that from your assessment. In the framework, after you've selected which events or trends you want to focus on, the framework will give you a list of hazards associated with those selections. So for example, if you've chosen flood and droughts, the framework will give you this list of hazards, and then it'll prompt you to go one by one through each one and consider if your sanitation technology was exposed to this hazard, would it have a low impact, meaning it doesn't affect it at all? Would it have a medium impact, so maybe it causes some problems or some degradation of performance? Or would it have a high impact in that if your technology was exposed to this hazard, it would completely fall over? You might think to yourself, well, it depends on the magnitude of these hazards. You could, for example, force of floodwaters, our technology can withstand a certain force. So for each hazard, there's a specific quantifiable example of that hazard. And we made the example something that was a bit tough, but not really, really hard. So we're not talking about a huge biblical flood, but a flood that you could reasonably expect working in a lower middle income country. And you would say, okay, I think this would have a low, medium, or a high impact on my technology. Step 4 is about thinking about the design features of your technology and the extent to which they can reduce those risks. We came up with 25 that we identified from the literature. So we pulled these from sanitation technology literature, but also literature from other sectors. Housing and shelter was a big one. There's been a lot of thought about how to make a climate resilient building or home, but also from sectors like energy and water supply. So I don't have time to go through all 25 of these, but quickly going through each category. Avoiding exposure to hazards category refers to features that either make the technology or certain critical components, it moves it out of harm's way so that it doesn't come into contact with the hazard. Category B is about accepting that the technology will be exposed and just making it stronger and more robust so that it doesn't fail when it's exposed to those hazards. C refers to features that enable you to reconfigure the structure of the technology or to adapt its operation to accommodate the hazard. And then categories D, E, and F are really important because I think when we think about resilience, we think about, well, we want a really strong technology. We want a toilet that's like a tank and it can withstand anything. But in reality, that's going to be really hard to achieve. And we have to expect that sometimes failures will happen when there's things like floods and droughts. So we have categories like containing failures, which refers to features that allow certain components to fail, but the technology can keep working even if suboptimally. Limiting consequences of complete failure. So if the technology completely fails, that it doesn't start doing something like spewing raw waste into someone's living room, but that the failure is contained. And then facilitating fast recovery. So if there is damage or disruptions or failures, that we can quickly bring it back in line. And then finally, the last category is about design features that enable us to contribute to things beyond just sanitation, but some things that aid community resilience more broadly. So some examples of this, probably the most popular example is raising. So you simply raise up the technology so it doesn't come into contact with things like floodwater. The inverse of that is burying, to put it underground so it doesn't come in contact with wildfires or wind force. Portability is something where you could just physically lift up the technology and move it somewhere where it's not going to become exposed. So container-based sanitation technologies are like that, and they don't require water or electricity inputs, which are systems that could be exposed to a hazard, but since they don't exist as inputs, they're not going to be exposed. An example of withstanding exposure is that we know that spherical or cylindrical or geodesic shapes are able to distribute wind force and water force better than other shapes. Redundancy and diversity comes up a lot in resilience literature. This is an image of an ABR, which has multiple tanks, and one can configure the tank such that if a tank stops working, the pipe could sort of go around the chamber that stopped working and then go on to the next chamber. And then skipping down to providing benefits beyond sanitation technology. This is an example of a biogas toilet, which one obviously provides the sanitation service, but then as an output, it's also generating biogas, which can be used for electricity and aid broader resilience in the community. So just reflecting quickly on what this could mean for standards, well, one thing I'd like to know is that more is not necessarily better. We don't mean to suggest that the best toilet would have all 25 of these design features. You would end up with a very convoluted and complicated and probably expensive toilet. So you just need to do a few of these very well. And if you're thinking about standardizing things so that they are climate resilient, a question for me is, are some of these more amenable to standardization? How would you choose amongst these to make something internationally or just nationally standardized in a particular design? Finally, the last step is based on the earlier tabs that the user filled out in the framework. The ClimateFIRST will make an overall suggestion of moderate, low, or high impact based on the proportion of hazards you scored as low, moderate, or high. And then you as the user make the final judgment as to whether you think your technology is low, medium, or high resilience against each one of these hazardous events and trends. So if you're interested to learn more about ClimateFIRST or to try it yourself, you can use this QR code or this link, and I'll put this into the chat. The link includes instructional material and a video on how to use ClimateFIRST, and it contains the framework itself. And I'm also happy to take questions and comments offline if you want to know more. Thanks very much. And actually, that's the end of my presentation. I'm going to hand to Mei now, who's going to help facilitate our panel discussion. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Hi, my name is Mei, and thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Chai, for the presentation. I think there's a couple of questions for you, Chai. Do you want to address them now or at the end of the panel discussion, Chai?
I can respond some now, and later.
Okay. I think since before we start the panel discussion, I think maybe we can. So there's one question from Remy about he's saying that the latest research in the sector focuses on the whole system, but for what was published, what you have presented, it seems like it's only very focused on individual technology. So the question is, have you or how are you considering the whole value chain?
Okay, I think this is one of the very good question. Also, our team asked ourselves at the beginning. We try to cover in all aspects, even in the individual treatment or in the whole process of the physical sludge management change. But we found the very difficult in terms of the transportations, because the emission factors and also the rules and other complications in terms of the GHG emission is quite very complicated. We have the factors, but we cannot integrate in terms of this kind of the evaluations, and then that's why we scope down in just only for the individual treatments to show the functions, to bring up the idea for the design features. And then if I could recommend for the whole process, I think there are another tools like the eCam tools that could help for the bigger scale for the input data to plannings, and then the emission of the GHG. That could be another kind of the tool can be support for this aspect in my opinions. Thank you.
Right, the tool you're referring to, could you type it in the chat group? Maybe some of the people are not aware of this tool. Thanks very much for that. And then there's one more question for you, Chai. That one is regarding from Robin Tompkins. He said, is the solar septic tank a solution for communal or public toilets? And has it been tested only at household scale?
Okay. The solar septic tank technologies, I think we implement in the Southeast Asians more than 10 units with Thailand and Cambodia. Then some of unit we install in the primary school and also in our academic building as well, because we found that in the maybe communal toilet also the characteristic of the wastewater also different in somehow. And then we also publish that kind of the paper of the implement solar septic tank into the the communal toilet unit as well. I think we can apply for the bigger scale from the solar septic tank.
Cool. Thank you. All right, thanks very much. So we've got the questions clear out. I feel a lot better now. So I'm gonna do a quick self-introduction. I think Michaela mentioned briefly at the beginning. My name is Mei Yi Chan, and I'm the Senior Program Manager at non-sewered. I've been looking after testing of non-sewered sanitation system at non-sewered for quite a number of years now. And also my team and I have been involved with the ISO 3500 standard development and also revision right now, which is what some people may call like the reinvent toilet or single unit system. Before that, I worked for the World Toilet Organization implementing sanitation solutions. One of the projects that came to my mind while I was working for the project in Cambodia, we were working on projects on the Thong Lake Sap. And Thong Lake Sap during rainy season, it gets full, the lake, and people can use the lake as normal for transportation. But when it's during the dry season, it's pretty bad, and the sanitation situation gets really bad as well. So I think the topic that for the panel today is very much of putting two topics together: climate change, standardization, and the impact, whether there's a role for standards to play in this sort of technology. So maybe to kind of get a feel from the crowd before I start my first question, I would like the group, there's 80 over people attending the webinar right now. How many of you are working in a sector where you have to consider climate risk for your solutions? Just put your hand up on the chat box, or just put yes, me, because like what Tat Chai has shown earlier in his slide, in the sanitation, non-sewer sanitation sector, at the beginning, we are thinking about providing solutions. So the provision of access to safe sanitation was on everybody's mind. But in the last 3 years, when we look at the climate change, the risk of climate change, and also the greenhouse gas emission, more and more funders, more and more social impact investors are asking practitioners to show that your sanitation solutions are climate resilient, and it would be even better if you can quantify the greenhouse gases emission and whether your solution can be considered as a carbon offset. You know, these are very hot topics these days. So I'd like to see there's only one person who said yes. So, but then if you are working in this sector and are faced with such scenario these days, please do type in the chat box so that we understand your profile a little bit better. Meanwhile, while that's happening, first question I have for our panel, and it's open to everyone. But maybe I'll ask Priyan to answer, because we have heard from Jeremy, we have heard from Achai. So the question I have in the context of climate change, what do you think is the most pressing challenges faced by sanitation system globally? That's my first question. And the second question is, how can innovative technologies contribute to enhancing their resilience? So Priyan, do you have any insight that which you can share?
Yeah, thanks, Me. I think from a global perspective, what we find is that with the impacts of climate change and it being quite devastating in certain areas, that has a real impact on our current infrastructure, so bulk sanitation and water infrastructure, which then results in discontinuity of services. We had communities here in South Africa that were impacted by extreme flooding and were without water supply for almost 200 days, and that's an entire community. So that is one of the major challenges we are finding right now, is how do we actually ensure that what solutions are on the ground are resilient to climate change without preventing breaks in sanitation delivery models. And okay, I'm gonna open it up to the other panel members, but I think one of the solutions to that is having on-site solutions that are provide safely managed sanitation services. One such solution are non-sewered sanitation systems as defined by ISO 3500. And other decentralized approaches, which could be at a far smaller scale to large conventional wastewater treatment works like decentralized wastewater treatment systems, but are far more resilient because they have a lower loading capacity, they're on the ground, and far more resilient in terms of the type of technologies employed in their design. But I'll hand it over to the other panel members if they want to add to that.
Thank you. Yeah, Jeremy or Tachai, do you have more points to add on that?
Yeah, I might jump in. When you ask about what climate hazards are so most consequential worldwide, I often think about climate impacts into two categories of indirect impacts and direct impacts. And the indirect impacts are things like it could cause a collapse of livelihoods in rural areas, and we get large-scale rural to urban migration. Impacts on the economy and the trickle-down effects from economic impacts on investments and resourcing for sanitation. But those are sort of big macro forces, and from a technological design point of view, it's hard to design for those kinds of things. In terms of direct impact, say the direct impact of a flood or a drought or sea level rise, lots of people talk about floods, and I think that's the most concerning one, particularly in city environments where you have lots of people living in a dense setting and in huge volumes of fecal sludge just underneath their feet. And when you get one of these heavy rainfall events, everything gets lifted up, all the waste gets lifted up, and it spills into the streets. And I've done interviews with people that have said during flooding events, the floodwater comes into our living room, and you can see the feces in the floodwater, and it's in our house. And oftentimes when we talk about safe sanitation, we're worried about, okay, the pathogen's going to get from the pit, it's going to go through the soil, it's going to get in the water supply, and then you drink the water supply and you get sick. And it's kind of like, forget about that. You're going to have the feces in your living room whenever it floods because all of the containment units are overflowing. So I think that's a really big problem. Droughts don't get talked about as much, but they are important as well. I think there's evidence that when there are water shortages, and water shortages happen for lots of reasons, but droughts contribute to those, people's water supplies get cut off, like Prayan just mentioned. And in areas where people have water-based toilets, suddenly they can't flush their toilet and they can't operate it. And we've also done interviews in Indonesia, and people say when that happens, we go back to open defecation. We go to the beach because we can't even flush the toilet. So they have the toilet, they have a beautiful toilet and a containment unit, but they can't use it because there's no water to use it. So responding with technologies, I get really excited about the idea of prefabricated containment units. I think a great system would be if we had centralized manufacturing of containment units that could meet standards, could be easily installed. Ideally, yeah, it might have to be affordable to communities and not have environmental impacts. And that if we had centralized production of containment units, it takes the households and the communities out of the equation, because often they, in terms of technology design, because it's not really sensible to ask households to design their own sanitation technologies. Given that it's essential public health infrastructure, it's kind of like asking the community members to design the bridges that all the cars are going across. We would never do that. We have experts that do that. So we should have sort of standardized, safe development of containment units, and having prefabricated technologies is a way to do that. I have plenty more to say about that, but I won't take up any more time. Thanks.
Thank you. Tachai, do you have anything else you want to add to the topic?
Yeah, I agree with Prayan and Jeremy. It's both the impact from the climate change that also can cause for the infrastructure and also the public health. And then a few points from my side, just for the maybe human well-being, is maybe the resource scarcity in the future. Like if we have very impact on that one, it can be on maybe change of the precipitation patterns or increase of evaporation. It can cause in terms of the availability of the water for the sanitation as well. and also it can be the disruption in terms of the service deliveries, and also increase in terms of the operation and repair costs. Then innovative technology is quite important, and one of the area that we can integrate to have a kind of the solution is like the IoT system, or maybe the warnings, or the remote sensors to monitor, to warn, or to maybe a kind of the real-time monitoring to support this kind of the solutions. I think that is a few part from my side.
Thank you. And I see Fatima put in the chat box that the challenges that they are facing, the lack of design standards to guide the design of the appropriate off-grid sanitation technology to suit informal settlements. And I feel that Jeremy, the ClimateFIRST assessment framework is a really good tool to even start giving, if in the future, to develop some kind of design guideline standard. That risk assessment approach is a very good fundamental tool to help kick that off. Maybe it could become an ISO standard, but that's a different topic altogether. I have a question for Jeremy, and also invite anybody else who wants to chip in as well. Jeremy, so given the urgency of addressing climate change impacts on sanitation, what role do you think that policy frameworks have to play in promoting the resilience solutions? And also, how can businesses actively contribute to policy development in this area?
I think I'll start by answering the latter end of that question about how businesses can develop, because I was just talking about having sort of centralized, standardized manufacturing processes for installing sanitation technologies. And that's where business innovations can make a huge difference. If you have a private sector who says, hey, I have an idea, I can come up with an idea that the design that's going to resist floods, it's going to work in informal settlements. It's going to be affordable, it's going to be easy to empty. They can fill in that, and then they can say, and I can produce 10,000 units in this amount of time, and then you can go and you can install those in your city. So I think businesses have a lot to offer in terms of making innovations. And I think what Fatima put into the chat sort of presages one of the issues is that, well, they need to be guided by standards or guidelines on what is going to be safe or what's permissible. And I think when you have sort of a centralized manufacturing process, it makes it easier to apply standards. A lot of countries do have regulations, but the households don't know about them. The masons and local communities don't know about them. But if you had, say, a business, it would be easier to regulate, to say, these are the standards. We want you to build a technology that's going to comply with these ISO standards. And we also want it to be able to resist floods and such. And then that's the job, I think, of the governments in terms of policy and frameworks, is to provide the environment for businesses to flourish and make those innovations by enforcing regulations, saying, okay, we're not going to ask the communities or the households to build the sanitation infrastructure anymore. It can only be done by people who meet certain requirements, and we're going to certify that they meet those requirements. So I think the government's crucial in sort of setting up that environment.
I was muted. No, thanks, Jeremy, for that. So the next question I have is for Priyan. Priyan, I'm aware that you are part of the committee member in the ISO 3500 standard revision, actively participating and representing South Africa on the ISO PC platform. So my question to you is related to so the question is, how can international collaboration and partnerships be leveraged to establish and implement global standards for climate resilient sanitation practices?
Thanks, May. I just want to quickly respond to Fatima. ISO 3500 has been published. It was published in 2018. We're actually revising it now after the 5-year period. So just for some clarity there. Back to the question, global standards are a good way to allow for knowledge transfer between different countries, we have different capacities, and in so doing, it allows for good practices in terms of setting out minimum requirements for, in this case, being sanitation. I think that that having that international collaboration really sets the standards for building technologies that are resilient, sustainable, that are safe, and just that co-generation of knowledge is very important. It also leads to capacity building. We find, especially when sitting in these PCs, that very often the global north is not too familiar with what the global south is experiencing, and having that constant communication allows us to build, set the guidelines for allowing technology developers to build resilient technologies in that space. Can I go on further? I'm just looking at the time.
Yes, please do, please do.
Okay, great. Another important aspect that we find sitting in these PCs is that, so talking back to the situation of the global south, we experience things on the ground as well. So part of the ISO 35 revision was looking at, it was a very ambitious standard, right? And what we find, especially in the developing countries, is that we lack the capacity to test these technologies, although some of these technologies are sitting at almost commercial readiness. So I think it's very important that we have this international collaboration, because it leads to training and capacity building on both fronts.
Right. I completely agree.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. I thought you stopped, but it is because I think your video just stopped for a while. So sorry to interrupt you, Priyan. Yes. Can you guys hear me? I think Priyan has frozen.
Is it better now?
Oh, now you're back.
Yeah,
now
I
you're
can
back.
hear you. Am I frozen?
Good. No, not anymore.
Oh, shoot.
Not anymore.
Okay, I'm gonna put my comments in the chat.
Okay, thanks for that. Yes, I think I 100% having developed two standards, the ISO 31800, which is for fecal sludge treatment unit, which and also non-sewered sanitation system. International exchange of knowledge is humongous. We have so many experts, subject matter experts, coming together, trying to discuss and find the best way forward to standardize a huge challenge, which itself is a huge challenge. So, Jeremy, I've got two more questions for the sake of the audience. Please stay back for a little bit more. I've got two more questions, one to Jeremy. Jeremy, how do you see the tool that you have developed, like ClimateFIRST, informing the development of policies and standards for climate resilient sanitation technologies that we have been talking about?
Yeah, I'll answer really quickly so we can get to your next question. I'll just say that I talked a bit about how it's the government's responsibility to set up the enabling environment for innovations in technology, and that involves saying to them, what are the standards that you should follow? And ISO standards provide for that, but they haven't yet maybe accounted for climate change resilience as much as they could. So I'd hope that something like ClimateFIRST, which is drawn on academic literature about design features, that we could look at those intensively and think about how could these be, how could we test these, how could we prove these and make these, prove that these are going to provide for resilience in communities. I'm not super familiar with the whole process of how standards come into meaning, but I think that we need to do some engagement with the academic literature on technological resilience to climate change, and I hope that ClimateFIRST has helped to synthesize some of that thinking.
Oh, thank you for that. And we can certainly have a big conversation on maybe how to put a standard through for design. I mean, based on some of the comments in the chat box, make this probably a true need to have a design guideline for such technologies to be climate resilient. So the last question I have a question to Tachai. So you have worked on the book and published the Climate-Smart WASH Catalogue, and it shows many innovative wash technologies for reducing emissions and adapting to climate risk. What process should implementers and decision makers follow to consider all the available options and choose the right ones for their context?
Okay. Thank you very much for the question. This is quite very important how we can apply the catalog into the real world applications.
Yes.
And then the purpose for our catalog is like try to identify the resilient sanitation technology as much as possible. And then for the process for the selecting the most suitable technology for the policy makers, decision makers, or WASH implementators, I think it can be some kind of the first step they can review to get the familiar in the informations or the broad range or the range of the technology available right now in the catalogs. And the second thing that they can do, they can work on the contextual analysis, that they can understand the factors from their specific country of locations, like income for the geography, climate conditions, infrastructure, or socio-economic conditions as the criteria. And then they can come back with that kind of information to discuss with the stakeholder consultants who are the relevant in that kind of the implementations or the constructions. And then they can get some more information which can be a kind of the prioritize the criteria. Then again, it can be the process of the implementation, like a feasibility analysis, impact assessment, or the pilot testing at the end. I think that could be the overall process that I could recommend for the users. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay, before I close the panel discussion, I want to thank our presenters, Jeremy, Tachai, and Priyam, for your contribution to the panel discussion. Is there any, I would say, parting words or advice you want to give to our audiences? Any, or to reach out to you for further information on certain subject matter? So, and the slides will be shared, I think, for after this presentation, right, Michaela? Yeah, so I'll hand it back to Michaela to finish the webinar. Thank you to all our participants that had taken the time to join us. So, Michaela, pass it to you then. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Prayan. Thank you, Mei, Jeremy, and Tachai for facilitating this discussion and for sharing, your frameworks and your insights. I think this is definitely an ongoing discussion. And so I also want to thank the audience for engaging in the topic in the chat box for your questions and everything. Yeah, please do keep in touch with the amazing work that they're doing. If you can maybe paste any links that the audience can, like dive into after this, please feel free to do that now. As mentioned, yes, the presentation will be emailed to all those who registered after this webinar. But yeah, until then, I just want to say thank you again for joining, and we hope that you do join us for our next FSMA Spotlights webinar next month. We else it every last Thursday of the month. So yeah, if there's nothing else, I wish you all a pleasant day and afternoon, evening, and yeah, take care.